Yes, hello. Thank you for being here, and we would like to come over to next event, which is actually the closing event of Ukrainian program on Frankfurt Book Messe, of the program Fragility of Freedom. And I would like to tell right away that we have here a mistake on the monitor. You see two people and we are three. We have to be three here. I will present the speakers right now so that you know with whom you are speaking. And we are also thankful to Goethe-Institut Ukraine for the support of this whole program, which was going on a few days here on the book forum. And we are now also happy to close it and to speak about forms of presence. And this discussion or this sharing talk is also about how culture and arts and education can be present in these times when the resources are not enough, and which creative forms they are finding in this way. And for that, I have, I think, two best speakers which could be there in order to speak about that. Olesia Ostrovska-Liuta, who is General Director of Мистецький Арсенал. Мистецький Arsenal is an art museum complex and one of the most important cultural institutions in Ukraine. We will come to it. And it's also Anna Novosad, who used to be Minister of Education and Science in Ukraine in 2019-20, and now she's co-founder and strategic director of a newly created foundation, Safe Ed, and we will be also speaking about this foundation. And I would probably start with this, if you're okay, Anna. Yeah, like Safe Ed is a foundation which is dealing with very important, urgent issues which education is having. For example, you're helping to construct the damaged schools in many regions, also in Mykolaiv and in Kharkiv. You're helping to arrange bomb shelters in schools, but you're also working together with schools on new strategies of education and new strategies of curriculum, how educational process can be going on. And what I have seen, you could fundraise so far around 5 million euros. It's probably more right now, but yeah. And could you also tell us about these strategies? Which strategies are you using in this context where the resources are not enough for other things, and probably education is unfortunately not the highest priority? And which strategies do you find, and which strategies also for collaboration do you find in this process?
Thank you very much, Alyona, and I'm happy to be here at this closing event. I think I would start with, by now, very unfortunately trivial and obvious thing. However, I think it's always important to stress that Russia is having this war not only against Ukrainian military, but it's having the war against the entire Ukrainian nation, and it having the war against every basically sphere and sector of our life. And unfortunately, education is one of the biggest victims of this aggression that hasn't started in 2022 or 2014. It has started more than 300 years ago when Russians first occupied parts of back then Ukrainian territories and started to basically destroy and demolish the Ukrainian identity also through culture and education. By now, Russia has very intentionally, deliberately, and cynically, and also very strategically destroyed every 10th school in Ukraine. So before the big war, we had roughly 15,000 schools. By now, 1,500, so 1,500 are gone completely, and hundreds and hundreds are seriously damaged, and that's only general secondary schools. I'm not even counting kindergartens, so on and so forth. So they do it very deliberately. You can see that they target civilian infrastructure, schools, not only when there is a basically a potential presence of Ukrainian military. They do it all over Ukraine, and also in instances when there are basically just civilians. We had that experience last August when Iranian Russian drone hit a school in Sumy region. It's 200 kilometers from the border. It's really far, and they hit it with a drone. Then 4 people died. there were no military. These were just civilian people preparing for the September. So this attack is very intentional. On the other hand, for us, for Ukrainians, those who stayed in Ukraine and also those who returned, because people, well, especially women with kids, are returning also in quite big numbers. And I see that in many, many cities and towns and villages where we work as the foundation. And thus, education is becoming an essential service. And oftentimes, it's one of those reasons and arguments and factors when women decide, okay, we return from Poland or Germany or any other country to Ukraine or not. Is there kindergarten or school? And thus, it's critical in many senses to have hospital, school, and like basic normality of living. So what we do is trying to somehow remedy the situation with quick access, quick emergency measures that could secure access to education. Of course, with this huge scale of destruction, it's impossible, and I really doubt that ever will be possible to get back all the schools that we had. But for me, it's less about the buildings right now. It's more about the access to any educational activities. So what we do are the few things. So first, we do temporary schools. These are either modular solutions or repurposed buildings, parts of hospitals, community centers, hotels or restaurants, even in some cases, that we agree with the local authorities and repurpose into school and completely rehabilitate them. These are schools in the bomb shelters and arranged bomb shelters in many locations, especially around the border in the north, and also massively in Mykolaiv region. The only way you can study, gather together is underground. And if we have to spend so much time underground, it has to be a safe, not only safe, but also a welcoming space to the extent possible. And the third thing that we do, it's been our invention, our so-called digital learning centers. These are basically like smaller learning spaces that we completely arrange with everything that is needed, from the rehabilitated space to procure devices and engage tutors to work with children. And this is especially critical to liberated areas where Russians usually steal everything, where the educational process is completely disrupted. So in a nutshell, those are a few things that we do. But also, as you mentioned, what we try to do is, before the big war, Ukraine, well, it was clumsy, it was hard, but we did a lot of reforms. And education reform was one of the most systemic. And so for us, it's also critical to somehow try to keep that pace of the reform, at least in those territories where that is by now possible.
And who are your partners when you're working on Safe Ed? Because I have seen on the website, like there could be any person. You can basically donate to any of the projects, but probably you also could get some bigger partners on the board.
Yeah, well, we try to be ethical, and everyone understands that every Ukrainian right now has to donate and donates to the Ukrainian army. And so we cannot go and fundraise huge funds in the society. We think that perhaps that would be a task after the big war is over, and people will have more time and resources and attention to other sectors. But by now, we predominantly work with more international partners, from European Commission to UNICEF, various less known organizations from Denmark, Germany. Germany is actually there is a organization called AVO, and they are our great partners in Chernihiv region. And, oftentimes in Ukraine, partners are more prone to come to Bucha, to Irpin, to those places that are well known for this huge tragedy. Unfortunately, this tragedy is in so many other villages and towns. And I'm grateful, for instance, in this sense, to German partners who agreed to work in those very, very far remote areas next to the border with Belarus, for instance. And that is really critical. So thanks to German partnership, we managed to arrange a couple of huge learning spaces in the bomb shelters. And those were first opportunities for the local kids in a year time to get back together in person. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Olesia, as I said, Мистецький Арсенал is one of the most important cultural institutions in Ukraine, and I can say that many people were looking up also and looking what Мистецький Арсенал and some other bigger institution will do or not do in Ukraine. And for example, it was an important, for me and for many other people, an important symbol that, for example, Book Arsenal was continuing. It was founded in 2011. Yulia Kozlovets, who is one of the curators of it, she was here on the panel, on the previous panel. And it was one of the signs of hope also for the community. So it's possible to make a book festival during the full-scale invasion. And how could you also frame it? Which collaborations, which other projects could you also make happen in these times when the resources are not enough and when the security is under big question?
Okay, thank you for this question, and I'm also happy to be here and to closing the program with this event. And let me start with the second question, and then I will move on to the Book Arsenal. And the second question is, what other festivals or projects we are doing in this situation, in the situation of war? And here I must say that I am full of respect and admiration to what Anna and her team is doing and how safe it is helping to restore the very process of education where it is under attack. I think this is very, very crucial and one of the largest issues and challenges we as a society face apart from the military invasion, and that is losing of educational potential, and which means losing of future prospects for a whole generation perhaps. And this is something which is hard to comprehend, but we are used to thinking of ourselves, of Ukrainians, as an educated society with 100% literacy, but we might lose it in the war. And we at the Art Arsenal also asked ourselves what's our role in helping to avoid the worst case scenario. How do we serve our community and our children so that they get a chance for education? And as Anna said, they often say that, often works with other institutions, often of cultural, from the cultural part of cultural infrastructure, to ensure that there is some resource for children to get educated. This is the way we think about ourselves as well as an institution. How do we help to bridge the educational gaps? How can we as a cultural institution be instrumental in that? This is one of the reasons why we thought it's crucial to organize another event, and that's an annual festival. It's a children's festival, which we used to have before the invasion. And we didn't organize it last year offline. However, our educational team had capped a project called it's an essay. It's hard to translate because there is a word play, and I'm trying a little bit to translate that. These are essays. In Ukrainian, it's called antitvir, anti-essays. It's a creative writing competition. It used to be a competition before the war, but in 2004 teenagers, 2022, competition sounded like an unnecessary stress. You don't need competition in a situation when half of the country is displaced, and your children need support and not they do not need to compete with each other in this situation. So our educational department organized not a competition, but rather a program for teenagers to contribute their essays with the focus on the topic of the Book Arsenal, which never happened. Book Arsenal 2022 was supposed to have a topic theme, as we call it, and it was called the great movement of the people. And we just were thinking about resettling, finding new places to live, new ways of new lifestyles. But suddenly it was, in a very tragic way, very relevant to the experience of every Ukrainian. So we asked teenagers to contribute their essays focused on that subject. And my colleagues received an overwhelming amount of really great pieces of writing, where children were writing about their experience. So there were also workshops organized for them, and those essays all of them were published, and a part of them were translated in English and published as well. There was one thing that we tried to do, and it was May 2022, the very beginning of the invasion. And then we continued that this year in a festival called Neo-Educational. There is again a word play in Ukrainian. It's Neo-Osvitny Arsenal. And this is both non-educational and neo-educational in one word, Arsenal. And it's a festival for kids where all sorts of cultural institutions present their educational programs where kids learn through play and pleasure. And I think it was one of the most inspiring and cheerful events this year, where you had so many children learning and playing, because what do you do as a child in the war zone? You still have your life. You still have to be learning. You still have to get some education. You still have to live your best life, whatever the circumstances. And that's how we as an institution are trying to bridge what is not there in a more formal institutional way. And shall I speak about the book Arsenal now, or maybe later? Okay, the book Arsenal is our largest annual project, and that's a book festival. It's both a fair and a literature festival. And we had a question, we asked ourselves whether we should do it in 2023. One reason why it's such a question is that many publishers are in different situations. Some had to evacuate their teams and their books. Some were situated in Kharkiv, and Kharkiv is a city on the northern border of Ukraine, which means that Russian artillery gets into the city, so they are under constant bombardment. And working in Kharkiv is extremely hard, so much has changed there too. But there are also other Western Ukrainian cities that are not affected to the same extent. So the situation of individual publishers is complex. It's one thing. Another thing is that you cannot have the same scale of a festival, even in Kiev today, just because it's dangerous. We get missile attacks on daily basis. And what do you do when you have a few thousand, let's say 5,000 to 10,000 people in one place? It's a great risk. So on the other hand, as I've said, each of us lives our best lives here and now, even in war situation. And we as human beings need places and events such as festivals to be together. It's absolutely crucial for humans to come together, to think about their own experience, to have a place to speak about what they are going through, to cry, and to laugh. We've been laughing so much all at festival, and to hug. I don't know if you've noticed, all the Ukrainians hug all the time. And that's a new habit. It was not like that a couple of years ago. But you need that space of hugging, of being together, of having common jokes, of being able to cry together as well, of being able to kind of digest your own experience, and that's a festival. So we thought it's crucial to have it this year, but we had to reduce it in scale. It was more or less 1/3 of the usual scale, and honestly, I must tell you that as an organizer, I only my primary wish was please no missile attacks today. It's all you are thinking about. And just to give you a vivid picture of that, it was June. And in June in Kiev, you might have heavy rains. So there was a storm and rain outside. And everyone, and Мистецький Arsenal has also an extensive yard where many people gather, not just inside. So rain started and everyone got in. And at that point, to get to a shelter, to a bomb shelter, you have to get out. And it takes you about 7 minutes outside, walking outside to get to the shelter. And my only prayer was, no missile strikes now, please, because people cannot go out in the storm to get to the shelter. So that's one of the burdens you have as an organization doing a festival. On the other hand, you have this burden on one hand, and then you have this need on another hand. And there you decide what overweights and what decision is made. I'm blessed to have, believe me, a brilliant team. So it was easier to decide with that.
Yeah, when you were speaking about the storm, I was remembering the other sense. I'm living in the western part of Ukraine where there are like less air raid alarms and attacks, but still each time when there is a storm and thunder, we get a message from our mayor telling people it's only a thunder. It's not a missile attack or something like that. I could imagine it also. And Olesia, you must have had like really a lot of work with security, because aside of danger of missile attacks, you had current president on the book forum, you had former president on book forum, you had probably some other former presidents on book forum. You had like a lot of different guests there.
Yes, that's true. And I'm happy to admit that Art Arsenal is the place, and Book Arsenal especially is the place where politicians also come. And both current and former politician Anna, I think, was also there as a politician, I hope future too. Politician at the Book Arsenal. And just to give you a small human touch and a joke, before the president visited Book Arsenal, of course there were heavy security measures with all sorts of checks, because we are in the war. And imagine a wartime president inside of the crowd of people. And I think it's very, very brave and courageous to do that. So, but before that visit, there were many security checks, and we had a joke together with my colleague Yulia, who's here now, that we couldn't have afforded it ourselves. So it was actually a nice donation to the Book Arsenal.
Thank you. We are actually a cozy group here, but anytime you have questions, I will ask you from time to time, like, please raise your hand and you can also ask questions. Are there any questions from the group? Then I will put a question about politicians, because I wanted to do it. Yeah. Ukraine is known as a country with a very strong civil society, and also with actors of civil society who can take partially also the function of state, or what the state is not doing or like does not manage to do. And Anna, you've been a minister of science and education. Olesia, you've been called like in this list of people who were nominated for the Minister of Culture on some moment, like few months ago. I would like to ask you, as people who are working with these bigger projects, what is your opinion about Ministry of Education in Ukraine? How it's dealing with the current issues, and about the Ministry of Culture in Ukraine, how it's dealing with the issues? Is it dealing with the current issues in the same creative way, I don't know, easy way that you are doing, or it's happening somehow differently? It's your personal opinion on that.
Well, first of all, I think it's in our very, very kind of going backwards history to have a very vibrant, well, if not civil society, then very horizontally organized society, horizontally organized groups of activists. And this is something that was helping us along the centuries. But what was also our curse, because I think we do great revolutions, really powerful, successful, but then we have a bit of challenge and the problem being more, nerdy and maybe boring in building institutions and building institutional practices, bureaucracy in a good sense. And so I think there is still a lot to do in terms of statehood with regard to our institutions, especially national government institutions. And I think since 2014, and this is when I joined the ministry day one after Maidan, after the Revolution of Dignity. Back then, I would not even dream of that because it was Yanukovych time, and you don't even dare dream in entering public service if you are not son or daughter of someone's. So I worked there for 6 years after the Revolution of Dignity, and so different ministers until becoming myself one. Now, for me, it's a little bit hard to assess the effectiveness of the ministry because people who are in the new team are good colleagues and good acquaintances of mine. So I try to give them still a kind of an opportunity to show the results and also acknowledge the fact that I think the teams that are now in the in different governmental ministries are actually dealing with the hardest times ever in our independence. You cannot compare anything else to that. And so it's very easy to criticize any minister, including Minister of Education. But when you have every 10th school destroyed, 500,000 of kids abroad, 2 million kids doing online, 1 million kids doing offline, lack of bomb shelters, and other challenges, and on top of that, no funds, because Ukrainian, for instance, teacher salaries are basically barely covered by the Ukrainian government. They are paid by the World Bank, for instance, well, partially. So there are so many challenges that I would be that would not be ethical for myself to anyhow assess their effectiveness. What I would say is that what we really need right now is more coherent and more systemic strategy of recovery of access to education that would be time specific, because based on my own experience, what we can do now in terms of recovery of access to education, rebuilding of schools, getting kids back to learning, is very different in comparison to what we could do last year. For instance, in Chernihiv, this is the northern city where we started working at first. I remember the city after Russians were ousted from the north. The city was a complete ghost, right? People were afraid to go outside. 27 out of 34 schools bombed. It was a nightmare. But right now, it's a vibrant city with roughly 85% of kids back to the city, right? Schools are being back in terms of physical recovery. So, and that's just one of the examples that even if the war is ongoing, there are still different phases and stages of what we can do and how. And I think this is right now a challenge for the Ukrainian government and the society at large on different levels to do just that. Because, well, unfortunately, we depend pretty much completely on international, on foreign support, especially when it comes to recovery, especially when it comes to huge recovery like in education. And so we have to have a very clear message and clear strategy on that. And I think, unfortunately, this is something that is currently lacking.
I would agree with Anna, and I would also say that working in Ukrainian government right now and Ukrainian ministries is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world at the moment. Challenges are absolutely enormous. Working atmosphere and the subculture which we inherited from the Soviet Union is hugely unhuman and unproductive. And being a civil servant in Ukraine is a very, very, very hard job. I was one for a short period of time, and I remember it as the most stressful, very hard time of my life. So I wouldn't dare to actually undermine those people even more. There is also a huge problem in Ukrainian civil service generally, that many of the people that work there were women as well. And those women evacuated together with their children to other places. So our governmental bodies are depopulated in some times. You just don't have people working in those institutions, and it's extremely hard to employ people in those institutions, those governmental institutions, also because of the really unhuman subculture that was partly inherited and partly created, honestly speaking, also by our efforts, sometimes radical and extreme efforts of the cleansing of corruption. Sometimes it's way too irrational in certain cases. So that builds an environment in which working for the government, for people who are in those institutions is very, very hard. Having said that, the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture at the moment doesn't have a minister, so you can't really assess that. And I still hope that there will be a competent government member in charge of culture in the nearest future. Let's hope for that.
Thank you. I'm looking once more whether there are questions from you. Give me a sign. Don't see it. Then I would have my question. It's my final question, and probably then I will ask once more last time if you have questions. So like the last chance is still coming. I would like to ask you, in your professional activity, what are main concerns that you're right now having, main challenges, and what are your main priorities of your institution? What would be the main priority of Mistecki Arsenal of Safe Ed for the next period of time you can think about, you can plan?
Let me start then. Well, one of the, remember what I've said about evacuation and lack of people, etc. This is also true for other institutions. For us as an institution to perform and to do our job and to serve our societies, we really need to have the best professionals that are there. And I am happy to be a part of a great team. However, you need to expand sometimes. You need to get new people, and that's a problem. It's one of the problems is that we are systematically underfunded, and if you want great people, you still need to pay their salaries, even if not huge. However, they have to be sufficient for people to be able to live. Right, and we operate on the backdrop of many institutions of international technical support and financial support, which is absolutely great to Ukraine. But those institutions need their employees as well, so we're competing with them, and that's a hard competition. There is one thing. Second thing is that it's very, very hard to plan. So we have an inner joke that we do not plan things. We hope for things to happen and work in that direction. So you have to be extremely tolerant to change. You have to accept that things will not go as you wanted them to go. You have to be ready to change your plans, routine, to interchange between divisions, to the such a practice when people from one division will kind of replace people in other divisions, although it might not be their job descriptions. Forget about job descriptions altogether. You just think about capacities. Who is capable to do what. So that needs a huge amount of flexibility from the people, and people get tired too. You can't be flexible always. And let me give you a context. Probably the vivid picture that I can give you is this May in Kiev, and we were preparing the book arsenal that opened in June. But May was beautiful in Kiev. You had chestnuts blossoming everywhere, warm and full of lilac blossoming everywhere. But we also had missile strikes every individual night during the whole month. So we had 30-day nights of air raid alerts and strikes. So people did not sleep for 30 nights, and it was the whole city. Then I remember once coming to the office in the morning, and I see 5 or 6 people from the team standing under a beautiful blossoming tree, having black coffee and exchanging their recollection from the night where there was the night when the Patriot system, air defense system, first hit this Kinjal ballistic missile, Russian missile, which was thought to be impossible to intercept, and it was intercepted. And that's how you start your day. And then you go on preparing the book arsenal afterwards. And then you have to apply this strange logic that, okay, there are 30 nights of strikes in May, so they will probably run out of missiles for June, so we will probably be able to have our festival. And that's a very, very strange thinking, but you kind of learn to think in this way. So that I would say that on one hand, it just shows you how professional, how focused, and how devoted people are, but also shows how exhausted they get in some point. And that's and this is all on the backdrop of lack of financing. They also have to fundraise like crazy all the time. So that just gives you more or less the picture in which we operate.
And probably a part of your team also joined army, because I know, like in our case, we cannot find technical directors anymore because best people who were technical directors are now doing a very important job. They're all working with drones, and we cannot find anybody who could do a little bit more complex multimedia installation, because all of the people are doing more important job right now.
It's not our case, because these are mostly women that work in the arsenal, but there are also engineers. They are men. They have not been called to the army, but that can happen at any moment too.
Thank you.
Yeah, answer your question. I kind of like the title of this panel, Forms of Presence, because I was thinking, like, while you were talking, that currently in Ukraine, so few things are continuous, and they're just basically some forms of presence. There is some form of presence of sleep, right? There is some form of presence of a continuous physical training, because you might train, and then you have 20 nights in a row of strikes and your body just cannot do that. You have some form of presence of educational process, because you might have months without strikes, even without air raid sirens. And people are also very stressed when there are no sirens, because it means that something bigger is coming. And if there are no sirens, you kind of have your learning process either online uninterrupted or even offline. But these are all just forms. And I completely agree with Olesia that one of our challenges is this continuous uncertainty with regard to, are the instruments that we are offering to the war-damaged communities in liberated areas, would they be still helpful in a couple of months' time? Just to give you an example, we work a lot in the city of Mykolaiv. It's a city in the south. The Russians didn't manage to capture it. However, it was heavily shelled for a very long time, for roughly 9 months, until Kherson was liberated. And so what we do, a lot of schools are damaged there. And what's important, the water system is damaged. And what we did in Mykolaiv, we did 12 wells and 12 water purification systems in schools in order to give access to, because a school cannot reopen if there is no pure water. We arranged some rehabilitation of schools. And then, so like the city was preparing to get back offline. And then Russian struck with a Iskander missile the theater in Chernihiv. And then school was hit with a drone in Sumy. And everyone was like, okay, no one is going back to offline. Everyone will stay online for further notice, right? So the whole September, now October, Mykolaiv is doing online. And what we started basically doing even faster would be the bomb shelters that would be completely arranged as learning spaces and not just spaces for the air raid siren time. So I think this challenge of our solutions to renew access to education that would be fit for purpose, fit for time, this is one of the challenges. And then one thing that I would really like to mention, I think our common challenge, including those people who are who represent different countries here and those who are listening to us online, like a lot of us donate, a lot of you donate, a lot of us donate to various international organizations, or the governments donate, right? Like pretty much all the governments donate to UNICEF. And to me, it is really a huge challenge that it's a 600-day, 601, I guess, something like we stopped counting, of the war. And I haven't seen a fully fledged strategy of an international organization that is helping in Ukraine with regard to the sector, right? So I have no clue what different international players are planning with regard to recovery of education, for instance. And to me, that is a challenge, because I'm puzzled with regard to how long do you foresee your presence in Ukraine? In what form? Because distributing backpacks is nice and easy, but it does not solve an issue. Doing a tent, I've been to Mykolaiv 2 weeks ago. No, last week. I was there last week. We've been traveling around the liberated areas where we work, and I saw a lot of these abandoned tents with Save the Children label or UNICEF label. What are they doing still there? Like, they are completely abandoned. No one is using them, but nothing is happening with the completely destroyed educational infrastructure. And so to me, this is the question. Okay, guys, well, okay, I understand that the first shock is gone. The emergency phase is gone only in our minds. We all normalized the war. We all normalized, unfortunately, the damage. But what is our common strategy with regard to recovery? And I think this is a challenge for everyone. For the national government, for the NGO sector that I currently represent, and I think for these organizations themselves, because it seems like they are just running from one war or crisis or natural disaster to another, and I think that's not really sustainable.
Thank you, Anna. And you mentioned earlier on that in Sumy, if I heard you right, 85 kids they came back to schools, or like it was 85%.
No, that was Chernihiv, and the same thing in Mykolaiv actually. So currently, both cities, and these are big cities. Well, Chernihiv before the big war was 250,000 inhabitants, in Mykolaiv slightly more than 400,000. According to the local authorities' data, roughly 80% of children are back to the city, and they have to have access to education.
And what are your observations now about this coming back rate? Is it still on? Is it falling? Was it some kind of a wave when the people came back and now it stopped? Or don't you have any observations?
I certainly think that was a wave, because families are deciding before the academic year, what do they do? Do they stay in Germany, Poland, other countries, or do they go back home, right? So there's, of course, this time-related wave. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, question.
I have actually one question. So firstly, I have to say I really admire your work. What you are really doing now, it's really a big job, and thank you from me. I'm also from Ukraine. Thank you very much. And I asked myself, because we spoke about forms of presence, and I thought also about new forms, and you also told that if you rebuild schools, you also try to rethink model, and maybe also rebuild like some educational model in school. But I also asked myself, is it wartime the new time? Because of course we have to be very flexible. We have to be very. We have also to rethink a lot of stuff. But is wartime a right time for innovation and new forms? What do you think?
Well, I think that yes. I think we have to preserve as many parts of our normal life as possible, including this strive for doing better than we did before. And with regard to forms of presence, I think it also very much depends on the region of Ukraine that we are talking about. And thank you for reminding me. I actually forgot to mention this. Very, very war-damaged areas, liberated areas. They are very, they are very different from. Luckily, okay, it's a bad word, but thank God and thank Ukrainian army that not the whole Ukraine, right, is like that. So Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Transcarpathia, they can still have relatively peaceful, more peaceful life. And so these forms of presence are different. And I think like in liberated areas, at least that's what I see, this connection and link and connectivity between culture and education is really a form of presence that has to be strengthened, and that is gaining more and more power. As I mentioned before, especially in these areas, there can be no continuity. It's very, very hard to have at least 2 months of normal learning process. So what you have to do is basically pop up educational activities, pop up edutainment. And also that's from the kind of soft point of view. From infrastructural point of view, that's somehow still unclear to me, but many villages and little towns where we work still have intact what we call the houses of culture. These are Soviet buildings, right, that used to serve as community centers for concerts, blah, blah, blah. And we repurpose them into schools, or repurpose them into just community spaces that will be fit for learning, but also for local inhabitants to getting together in the afternoon. And I think it's also a form of rethinking how we use the obsolete old infrastructure in these circumstances. But with regard to new kind of concepts and strategies for schools, I do believe that we have to do it, because if there is part of the country that is not so severely damaged infrastructurally, they still have relatively, more chances to have. I can't call it normal living when you have just missiles, but still it happens more rarely than artillery shelling. I think it's critical that we try to preserve those reforms and those steps ahead that we've been doing before this huge invasion. And I think especially when we are talking about complete school rebuilding, it is critical to also enrich these new walls with new senses. Otherwise, it makes no sense. And this is, for instance, an example that we do in Zhytomyr. Zhytomyr hasn't been occupied. However, a few sites that Russians hit with the missile were the tank factory and the huge lyceum, scientific lyceum in the city center. The lyceum will be rebuilt, is now being planned to be rebuilt with the local funds and Portuguese funds, of Portugal government funds. And the city mayor asked us to say that, like, we don't want just walls. We want to have a completely new school that would have new philosophy, new approach, new concept, new program. And what we do for them is completely new tailored curriculum, teacher training programs in order, not to invest 10, 15 million euros into just new beautiful walls, but then the sense would be the same. I think that what this war has to bring us is a step ahead in many things.
Thank you. Last chance for questions. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. I'm just thinking about school libraries. do kids still have access to newly published books? Because we are here at Buchmesse, and I'd love everyone to have an access to cool books there in the school, because I think they definitely need to have that. And maybe do you think about any central kind of library for kids so that they can like access it and check out which books are there and what they can read, maybe by topics, by subjects?
Well, in those schools or learning centers or bomb shelters that we arrange, our obligatory, mandatory budget line is for new books. I have no idea how many hundreds of thousands of, millions of hryvnias and hundreds of thousands of euros we spend on new books. But for us, it's critical. We purchase a lot of new Ukrainian kids literature or historical literature. I think like most of the historical books that were here at the shelters we try to procure and provide to schools, but also we do a lot of collaborations with publishing houses like Видавництво Старого Лева to provide to collect books and send them to the liberated areas. However, this is, we are an NGO. It's a very, very limited activity. However, I do think and I do believe that it has to be a central governmental policy, especially for these eastern and southern regions that have been heavily Russified during the previous decades of the Soviet rule, and are still being, predominantly Russian speaking. But what we see among children and also among adults, but they are more sort of conservative by their age, is that they are willing to find this Ukrainian identity. They are willing to find this link. They are willing to read more about Ukrainian history and culture, and we try kind of to provide them that access to. I've been, as I mentioned, I've been last week to Mykolaiv and doing this tour around the schools, and like, oh my God, I'm entering this rehabilitated learning spaces that we did, and they have these beautiful books, and I really kind of want to get all of them to myself because I don't have those. Yeah, but I left them for kids. So yeah, we try to do that, but it's still limited. But there is an effort.
And besides that, there is also an ongoing initiative from PEN Ukraine. They are also collecting books. They're cooperating with many libraries. Also, like you can directly donate books to Kherson, for example, to Kherson Library through them. So you could check it out. They also trying to do that. Yeah, like it. Thank you so much for being with us on this discussion. It could be called forms of presence. It could be called forms of resilience. It could be called forms of resistance. It's all about that. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Olesia. And have a nice and safe day.